What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about the Rammus smallish update that is already on the PBE that is going live in patch 25.12. Unless we just rip it out by Friday, which I doubt, but it's always possible that we can always kick things back. Anyway, first things I want to talk about before talking about Rammus, though, is yes, I am still the design lead of the Summoners Rift Team's live pod. I still run reactive balance. I'm still in charge of the pro meta, things like that. That there was some confusion I saw when I said, oh, by the way, I'm being allocated towards behavioral systems. That is true in terms of like my individual contributor work. But like reactive balance is still 2 days every other Monday and Tuesday. I'm still running that meeting, making most of the calls around what we're going to actually do, doing individual work during those days as well. But also that for the other days of the patch, yeah, I'm working on behavioral systems, right? So clearing up some confusion there. Sorry that it was more confusing. Yeah, my bad. Ultimately, all of my responsibilities are still kind of the same ultimately. The other thing that I guess did not come across very well either, and that's kind of on me for not planning out that section of the last video, I'm actually very excited to work on behavioral systems. I felt for a while this is the most important kind of thing we could be doing on League, is making the like player interaction layer better. So I'm actually very happy that I'm working on what I think is the literally most important thing we can be doing. So I'll do what I can to make that better, right? I'm excited to work on it. Certainly going to be plenty of learning experiences for me, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a positive, and so happy to be here. All right, let's talk about Rammus. Talk about overall goals, right? As any time you do something like this, you should talk about the goals. And the primary one is allow Rammus to soak magic damage without losing the anti-attack. This is theme. Sorry, I didn't check for typos before I started recording. Rammus should still be the anti-attack guy. And look, it might be totally possible that he's going to still suck against like Gwen or Azir, but it's going to be a lot better. He's still going to be good against Briar. He's still going to be relatively good against Master Yi. He's still going to be very, very good against Yasuo. But yeah, he's losing some physical mitigation, and he's gaining a lot of magic mitigation as recompense. Where you don't, get to pick Rammus on 3 and then just lose triple AP right after. It's meant to soften him back out. Again, still wanting to very much hold on to the anti-attack theme. He still taunts you. He still reflects damage back at you. The overall damage of his thorns is not changing very much, but now he's allowed to be played into magic damage team comps, and then it's okay. And then he can just kind of tank stuff, and it's going to be all right. When we look at similar champions like, I guess actually Galio is the most obvious situation here. Galio actually has some good anti-AD matchups if the kit interacts well, even though he has the magic damage shield and the WDR scales off MR more than armor, if I recall correctly, or like only scales off MR, like he has a damage thing that scales off MR, like he's not so sharply tied to magic resist such that he can't actually like be good into like Yasuo type champions where he just like has the setup and the taunt and whatnot and feel okay. And so, yeah, I think Rammus is still going to probably have on average better AD matchups than AP matchups. But again, the goal is flatten him out somewhat such that if you did want to be a big Rammus player, you're allowed to be so. He's never really had a very deep player base, and I don't expect it to really be re-added here. But I thought it was valuable that Rammus was a bit more average in sort of compositional like aptitude. Okay, and again, still wanted to keep the anti-attack theme. Second one is reducing complexity where it's not needed. There's stuff in the WE and the R that all have complexity that to me weren't terribly important, weren't doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of making him a satisfying champion with appropriate counterplay. Ultimately, it's just like a lot of lines and things you had to learn and like combos that you could hard fail that to me just weren't really needed, that weren't really important. And we could like still have a very functioning, viable champion with decent amount of depth in terms of, his gameplay, without extra lines in random places that didn't feel needed. And so W and E and then some R mechanics are getting changed around for that. And then overall, assuming we can have some room for power, increase the satisfaction and punchiness of some of his abilities. And so some of the changes here, I think, should do a pretty good job of making him feel overall better about what he's doing. So first one is, this is most of the low important stuff. It's his Q, his passive, and his base stats. He is gaining some attack speed at level 1. This will, of course, carry through forever. It's not the AS ratio, but he's getting about 6% bonus AS. And then at level 18, 6% bonus AS is not as important, but like it's still there. His base CD is going up by 10, which looks really scary, except that his passive no longer has a base value on it. So, hey, real quick, don't worry about it. This is compensating this pretty much directly. The thing I'll point out, though, is that instead of the passive being really dictated by whether or not the W was on. Not only did like the bonus armor of the W matter a lot, but it also 1.5x the passive. Rammus will have just better auto attacks full stop because he just has the 10 damage outright. He has the 3 AD with outright. The armor ratio is always 15%, and he has a new 15% MR ratio. So Rammus just straight up does more damage per auto attack, and it's, I think, pretty much incomparable. It's like pretty clearly higher in all possible situations. Now, it's not a ton of extra damage. Like ultimately, a tank's auto attacks aren't that big, but I do like giving tanks pretty good autos because this is a great way to give them some kind of persistent threat to say, no, you can't just walk past me. You can't just ignore me. It's important that a tank is actually threatening enough that you can't literally ignore the champion. Yes, he has taunt, but still. This, again, is a overall higher auto attack damage. Now, that said, though, the passive being changed from magic on hit damage to pure AD. This means it's dealing physical damage, which means once you're past like level 7 or so, champions clearly have more armor than magic resist. And even if they were counter building Rammus, they're building a Merc Treads or Wit's End or whatever, they would still tend to have, in like a mature game state, more armor than magic resist. This is, to be clear, intended as a nerf quite directly. There's really, really minor UI things that I think are valuable. Again, really, really minor here, but like seeing one big orange number is better than seeing a small blue number by a small orange number. That way, also the blue number can be the Thorns damage. You can track that more easily and sort of, you get a little bit more clarity overall. You have a little bit less spam and a little bit punchier numbers overall. Again, pretty minor here, but hey, it technically exists. But again, truly, like this is meant to be power negative to allow this to be power positive, to allow him to be better at things like punching a Void Grub or a Rift Herald or a Dragon. Now, he's still not great at fighting dragons, but like everyone who plays Rammus knows that W is not on all the time. Even when the W is on, it's comparable damage per hit, and the W is off, it's just more. And for the most part, jungle monsters have this, well, for regular camps, they have the same armor and MR. I believe Dragon specifically has less armor than MR, if I recall correctly. But, you know, Baron has more armor, and Otacon has more armor, and Rift Herald has more armor. But still, this TLDR is going to be, on average, better when jungling, and on average, neutral to sometimes worse when fighting other champions. The next change here is just really to buy win rate budget. For a while, this was paired with a pretty significant increase to his health growth, but in playtesting, he kept being overpowered and kept being overpowered and kept being overpowered. He kept feeling unkillable, and so we end up having only an armor nerf here, and he ends up still feeling very durable overall. Of course, if he ends up being too frail, we can buff the W, we can buff some base stats, whatever, but ultimately that W is still a really, really strong skill, and through the goals of trying to make him less armor skewed, literally less armor, obviously gonna do what it's going to do, and yeah, that's the result there. The final change to the Q is plus 0 to 40 more damage. Right now on live, Rammus can kind of max whatever. I don't think 40 damage on Q is going to really change that, but most players max Q. It is a relatively intuitive max, and it's going to be more true now. And ultimately, it's going to do some more damage. It'll be a little bit punchier. Really just, yeah, the spell's a bit punchier. Congratulations. It's somewhere we thought we could give power that would feel pretty good. This is still a relatively low damage spell overall, but we only had so much power to give, and so this is as far as we went. Rammus W. This is, I guess, the single most important set of changes. The resists are no longer skewed toward armor. So instead of giving 40 armor and 10 MR, which, by the way, did filter into the percent bonuses right here. So you would get 35% of 40 plus 35% of whatever he had overall. It's now 25 and 25. And instead of 3575 and 3050, it's 3565 and 3565, which means if you were just to sum all the total resists together, you go from 50 plus 65 to 125 to 50 plus 70 to 130. So technically, like if you only said it gives you these things, these numbers are higher. Now, the asterisk here is that if you were against equal amounts of damage of both types, then getting 15 flat MR and losing 15 flat armor is a buff, because getting more of the thing that you are like lacking is better than getting a little bit less of the thing you already have a lot of. Just mathematically, this is true. And again, because his passive and his W reflect care about armor and MR equally, spoilers, the MR is going to factor into the reflect as well. This means that this trade-off is completely neutral in terms of damage, and positive in terms of damage taken. Now, again, if the enemy team is 5 AD, clearly Rammus is strictly weaker, right? He's getting less armor on his W. He's getting less percent armor on his W after rank 1. And he's getting less armor from base stats. Like, clearly, if he's really ill against 5 AD, yes, his champion's weaker. But in a lot of cases, you're taking damage from multiple sources, and magic damage is actually really there, and so this is here. We have found in playtesting that Rammus feels quite durable. The end result is that this is ultimately relatively similar in terms of a spell. Let's move on. Next one is the damage reflect. 15 flat is still there. Instead of 15% of armor, it's 10% of armor plus 10% of MR. So keep in mind, is 10% of your MR greater than 5% of your armor? For a while it is. For your first clear, it is. For your second clear, it gets pretty close. If you're on Bramble Vest, again, unless your armor is double your magic resist, this is a buff. Now, again, there are going to be cases where your armor would have been double your MR. A very, very common Rammus build is full Thornmail and a Sunfire Cape. In those cases where that build is actually good, you're doing less Thorns damage than before. That's just going to be true. However, it is much more likely this champion is going to build an Unending Despair or a Jack Show or something, and all those things are going to be really, really relevant, and they're going to care about the MR. And again, considering that items tend to give about as much MR as they give armor on average, that you're basically getting sort of, right, any time where you would have subbed out an armor item for an MR item. Like if your build was going to be Thornmail into Hollow Radiance, this is just a buff, because you're getting double the scaling from the Hollow Radiance compared to, you're losing 1/3 of the scaling off the Thornmail, kind of, if that makes sense. Ultimately, again, full armor Rammus, clearly going to do less damage, but a more conventional double resist tank build is going to be just as good. I ran a lot of math on like, I played this game and I like screenshot, okay, I fought at 3 items and here's how many resists I had. And I'm like, okay, well, if I used old Rammus, looked at new Rammus, like, I'm doing like really similar damage. Like in a lot of cases, the reflect ends up being really, really similar to before, except that you're allowed to build this champion in magic damage team comps. The final one, and this is one of the spots where we took away some complexity, is getting rid of the duration extend on attack. This would give you 0.4 seconds per auto. That is now gone. This had some really weird situations where you had to time your W and E together in order to get enough hits, because he didn't have enough attack speed on his own to actually attack 10 times in 10 seconds because he doesn't have a 1.0 attack speed. And so it's like, well, if your E isn't up, you can't have full duration W, which means you're losing auto attack damage, which means you're also losing Thorns damage. You're also taking a durability loss because your W ends early. And it's like, wow, you can't press W without pressing E. That sucks. And it was generally a pretty bad scenario. It also gave him what I think is less reliability than he deserves. It's actually often pretty hard, or it can be pretty hard, to land 3 autos in a real team fight under Ball Curl. You don't have any movement tools. Like, your Powerball ends, you then go into W, and I guess you can taunt or try to hit them enough times, but you wouldn't always get 3 autos. And at the end of the day, just the feeling here is that we'll give you 1 second back. That's going to be, like, on net, this will sometimes be worse when jungling. Absolutely going to be true and a real fact, but the reliability, I think, pretty useful in team fights overall, because you couldn't always auto as much as you wanted to. And so here's just a number that you can learn, your opponents can learn, and 1 fewer thing that you have to hard combo around. Speaking of hard combos, the Rammus E is getting some changes as well. For the most part, this has very little impact on the champion. Not getting the bonus attack speed during E anymore. Sure. Now keep in mind, this wasn't always up. It was up a decent amount of the time when jungling, but it wasn't up very often and usable in team fights. So keep in mind, Rammus literally has more attack damage in almost all contexts and has more baseline attack speed. So this ends up being relatively neutral. Again, we have found that Rammus clears the jungle just fine and is overall a functional team fighter. This is another one where obviously Taunt does nothing except to give you attack speed when you're jungling, and you had to make sure W was up when you pressed E. If you got it wrong, you got 1.2 seconds of attack speed and then it fell off and you could just fail. I don't think that's great. There were other versions of E we had in testing. I'll share them in a little bit. But the consistent feedback had been like, from playtesters, like, man, I really hate all these hard combos I have to use while jungle clearing. I can't just press buttons. I have to wait, and I'm sitting here just like, well, my W's back up. I guess I can finally taunt, and then hooray. But it just felt really bad, and the ordering was kind of annoying. And one thing that wasn't written in the initial goal statement, though, I actually think this should also be true, is that Rammus should tend to be a good tank in lower skill play. that he's a pretty simple champion. That should be fine. We should preserve that. It's a good thing. I think it's fine that we have simplistic kits that are straightforward. But having your jungle clear contingent on knowing to combo your WE together, like, yeah, it's not hard to do necessarily, but it's still something you have to learn to play as champion, like, at all remotely well, because it's a lot of your jungle clear speed is keeping your E up at almost 100% of the time. And so ripping that out and being like, look, we don't need that. We can make your autos good, right? You can make your autos good without W being on. We can do all these things. I think it's a better experience overall. So in place of that is literally a flat damage on E. Yes, it's kind of weird to have like, here's some extra text here. Taunts the enemy champion or monster against monsters, deals some damage. Sure, but like, yes, that's like, here's this random extra rule tacked on, but it is a very low complexity rule. It says, oh, just like press taunt on monsters and it does something. That's kind of nice. Again, I'm not saying this like directly replicates the attack speed buff, but again, there's other attack damage buffs and attack speed buffs to make up for the E. When clearing, his clears are appropriate, we feel, with what we've been playtesting. If we need to tune this up, of course we can, but it's like, hey, here is a way to get some damage here that doesn't bring up a lot of complexity, absolutely does not have any timing tests at all, and just overall, like, not scary through those lenses. There's another thing that is true about Rammus on live, which is your E is locked out for about 1/3 of a second after landing Q. So, of course, while you're in Powerball, we seal all your spell slots. You can't press anything except R during Powerball. That's expected. I should take it back. You can R and you can W to switch out, but yeah, you can't taunt during Powerball. That's expected. Okay, fine. You can't use blinks and stuff, all normal stuff. You can't like Rocket Belt. Anyway, I should double check. Sorry, during the R you can't use a lot of stuff. During the Q you can't press E. Anyway, moving forward. There's another thing that goes on where when your Q ends, it actually puts a lockout buff on him that prevents him from casting E, which I assume might have been there to like ensure that he can't just like Powerball taunt as a combo. I don't think it's a big deal. I think he's allowed to do that. Now, one unfortunate situation though is this will still end up being true because the way spell slot lockouts work is he can't at least properly queue the spell up. And so you can mash E, but you still have to like wait for the spell seal to end before you can actually start your E cast. Ultimately, the Q knockup is not that long, and enemies can still Arcane Shift or Flash or whatever, but pretty consistent what I felt while playing Rammus, and other players have felt while playing Rammus, is like, they felt like they were just bad, like they couldn't get taunts off in time. It's like, no, actually the spell's a lockout on it. It locks out the E after the Q is done. Like, your Q is done, and you can ball curl right away. And the thing is, like, if it's there to like let animations play out, well, the W preempts that, or the R preempts that, or whatever. So it's like, it's not doing anything on an artistic level. It's just making players feel like they're not playing their champion, and that specifically the champion is not responsive. I actually think this is a pretty meaningful amount of power, because I think it was very frequent that players would fail to get the spell off and just think it was their fault, or that they got out of range or something. But no, it just locked you out, and it felt pretty bad. And this is power. Like, this is actually very, very real. But I think it's worth it, and we can tune around it. So the story I was going to tell about the E was I tried a version, because I knew I wanted to get rid of the attack speed for Rammus on his E. I wanted to try a version of E that gave the enemy attack speed. And so the version I tried for a while was gains 200% or 100%, it was initially 200% attack speed, and lowers their total AD by 50%, or 2/3 in the case when it was 2x, or 200% attack speed. And what I found was that, one, it did not matter for champions. The taunt was too short to like really feel that it just like didn't frenzy them well enough. And so I was like, that was kind of useless. I said, well, I can keep it on monsters. And I said, like, actually, if you taunt a monster, it'll taunt them for 6 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever, and it'll give them 100% bonus attack speed for those 10 seconds as well. Because now you can, like, have them frenzy on you, ball curl will, trigger on them, and you get some damage that way. Cool, like, you have a reason to press E while jungle clearing. Isn't that cool? There were several problems here. One was a lot of monsters' animation would desync from the damage. Like, you just taunt red buff, and it would swing at you wildly, and it would just, like, instead of being like damage, 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 it would be like damage, 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 damage. What's going on? Why is it doing this? I figured, look, I'm not solving this anyway. Also, it still failed to like, oh, I have to W and D together, or there's no point in doing this, which was true. And ultimately, it's like, yeah, okay, this isn't really working for this. Let's just say it's a really simple rule. It damages jungle monsters. Is it super elegant? Not really, but it doesn't have those other issues. So finally, we have some changes to the R. And so the first one is, I guess I'm gonna actually jump in here. We removed 2 rules from the game, basically. So we removed the damage amp based on how far Rammus flew during his R, which most is meant during Q, because like you had to be more than 800 range of cast range, which was like, yeah, like basically you have to be in Powerball for this to like really matter. And ultimately it's like, it didn't feel very needed. If you wanted to do more damage in the center, we have the Powerball damage for that anyway. And it like, I don't know, the variance there to me wasn't worth it or useful at all. And we could just like make the spell generically more powerful and not have this extra mechanic that like people already want to dodge the center because Powerball R is good. And that mechanic is great. I think like Powerball R is cool, and I'm like glad it exists. It's a really cool spell, and like we're actually buffing Q damage, so Powerball R is literally better for that reason as well. But it's like, let's just give it normal ult damage and get rid of this extra mechanic that I don't think is doing anything for creating interest or like creating like positive gameplay loops or anything. It's just like, it's just kind of here. It's not doing anything. You want to land R on people. You probably want to land QR. You want to taunt them, so you want to be in the center anyway. So like all the things you want to do are already true. So like, why bother having this? The second one is just something that I think was power without satisfaction. So there were 3 shockwaves that I think hit every like about 1.25 seconds after landing your R. And the damage would be up to 60 to 120 based on how many shockwaves hit, right? Because 20, 30, 40 times 3 shockwaves. And I suspect the vast majority of Rammus players weren't tracking this at all, and we're just like focused on something else going on. And it's like, well, here's another place we can siphon away some power that they're not going to notice, that no one's going to appreciate, that we can do something else with instead. And again, put it into the upfront R, because they will notice that. They will notice their QR being strong. They will notice the R hitting people and dealing decent damage. The other change is the Tremor slow. Another one where it's like, hey, I don't think this like slowly scaling, stacking slow is going to be appreciable either. I think this doesn't need to be here. I understand the old Rammus R did this kind of stuff, but like, there's a reason Rammus is a champ from 2009 and not very popular. His spells aren't very punchy. Damage over time is consistently like not a very fun mechanic. One thing I think is interesting is when there were the Blackfire Torch changes, well, I guess actually no Blackfire Torch changes as it turns out, a couple patches ago, one sentiment I saw from players was like, oh yeah, Blackfire Torch, all the power is in the percent ability power amp, not the dot. And it's like, that's entirely opposite, right? Like, Blackfire Torch at 1 item, when I fight you 1v1, that passive is 4 ability power. 4 ability power is a joke, right? That's nothing. Whereas like lighting you on fire for like 60 damage is like very, very real and is like a full spell's worth of damage, which is, pretty relevant, obviously. And if I can, refund it or anything, it's going to go really, really well. It's like, no, actually, Blackfire Torch, most of the power is in the dot. Most of the excitement is in the percent AP, which is why we're not going to change that, because it carries very little power, but tells players an exciting story. And I mean, it's great that players are going to be excited about something. Anytime you can like really, really win on the excitement to power scale, you're really happy. And so it's like, we're never going to remove that, but it's not where all the power is. Anyway, so the point around like this dot on the shockwaves and this stacking slow on the shockwaves as well, it's like, yeah, by the time it's like stacked up to the 4th, like the hit plus the 3rd, subsequent shockwave, Rammus was probably not even watching those people he was slowing anymore. Like all the value, like all the true payoff of that spell, he's no longer looking there anymore. Like he's already done something. He's like fighting some other guy who's like probably taunted anyway. So the slow doesn't matter because he's CC'd some other way. And like this other guy that you slowed for 80% or whatever, or dealt 120 damage to off on the ring because he like took a bunch of tremors. Rammus will never notice that and never care about that. And it's like, this just isn't a place we need to put power, because it's just not exciting to Rammus player, I think, at all, basically. And so having an upfront slow that's like actually meaningful, and then it just lasts for a while, that's much more likely, I think, to actually hold up and be something that Rammus players can be like, oh wow, cool, I press R and I have this big slow attached. And so what's funny is like, even though there's like 3 bits of complexity removed here, right? 1, 2, 3, each of these mechanics are now more simple. What it actually provides is the ability for a Rammus player to be like, you know what? It's a simple spell that says, damage an area, and that area is a slow for like 3.5 seconds. Cool. Also, the center, if I'm powerballing, is a knock up and a bunch more damage. Cool. That's the entire spell, right? That's a very real spell. It's a very real ultimate. I think it's totally fine. But what's interesting is what we've seen from more high skill playtesters is that they'll be like, actually, I'm gonna R past the back line. I'm not gonna try to like QR you. I'm gonna R past you, and not because of a bunch of complex rules around like if you travel behind them, it's special or whatever. No, it's just my spell has a very large, very potent slow zone that I'm going to deliver, so that if you try to run away, Ash, you're running through a 3.5 second long, 45% slow. I got you. And I will taunt when I'm good and ready because I got you. And like that's great. Like I love that depth is there. I'm glad that it's there without really any complex rules, right? It's a long duration slow zone and like Malphited basically, right? It's not a very complex spell, and yet actually has some depth around what you do there. And the depth is not like, oh yeah, you've got to always combo W and E together, otherwise they don't work. It's like, hey, this spell actually just has enough depth to it. I'm not saying like this is the sickest spell in League of Legends by any means, but there's like been some nice emergent gameplay over having just a punchy spell that does punchy things and like doesn't hide them from the player and doesn't hide them from their opponents either. So personally, I'm actually very happy with this R. I hope you like it too. Final change though is a cooldown functional nerf, right? It's just nerfed until level 16 here. So obviously it's just, this is win rate negative, but it was one of the only CC ults that didn't scale cooldown. Generally speaking, I'm pretty happy to have things scale cooldown and whatnot. Yeah, it's a pretty minor change. I don't think it's carrying that much weight, but like this is a free target move block to get away and, you know, jump over walls and whatnot. It is a pretty impactful spell. I mean, we are kind of buffing the damage overall. I mean, not like strictly, again, like sweet spot plus aftershock damage like would add up, unappreciably so. But yeah, the end result here is like, hey, R does less damage on a longer cooldown with an arguably better crowd control profile. The E doesn't give him attack speed, but it helps him kill jungle monsters, so it's going to be kind of close, but you can like cast it way more reliably. This is very power positive. This is, I would probably argue power negative, sure, but this is power positive. W, you know, the extreme cases of W, power negative, sure, if you can get into the full duration, but otherwise can tank in a lot more team comps. Q obviously certainly better. Obviously, like the end result of all this stuff is more auto attack damage on jungle camps, more neutral against champions overall. He's still going to be the anti-auto attack champion. He's going to be better against the magic auto attackers, and can feel good about like on hit Kai'Sa, on hit Varus, and like is allowed to build an MR item against these champions who have like a Nashor's Tooth or something. So that's the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.